to the fore, and it's extremely difficult to make any progress. For instance, in Europe, the continental countries would like to use regulation to kind of diminish the importance of London. And of course, not surprisingly, the British resist that. So it's extremely difficult, even in Europe, to find common ground. So this is a big problem confronting the world, because it's not a matter of restoring the financial system. It means creating something that wasn't there, namely global regulation.
Elizabeth.
Can I try, though, a point about second best? And that is, I understand the importance of and the value if we could get international cooperation. But that's not where we are. So the question is, what do you do with that piece of information? You can either say, as many have said who are continuing to resist any kind of regulation, well, then don't regulate us because not everybody in the world has been regulated. Or alternatively, you can say, maybe that's going to be our comparative advantage. The one casino in Las Vegas that is certified to run clean tables, that is that, when you go to bed at those tables, you know that the roulette wheel isn't tilted, that in fact the house will have the money to pay back on the chips after you've cashed them, is one where lots of people want to go. That's where certain investors want to be. So one way to think about this is to say our job in the United States is to run a clean and transparent system and let people see how the clean and transparent system works, because ultimately you invest in banks where the system is not clean and transparent, what you're betting on is that at the end of the day, that bank's home country will tax its people one more time to bail out and make sure that you're not the one who's holding the bag at the end of the day.
But suppose the following happens. We put into law our financial reform package, and the Securities and Exchange Commission, or whoever the bank regulators are, interpret the Volcker rule, I'm just theorizing here, in a very strict way. So that prop trading, proprietary trading, that's banks trading for their own accounts, so that prop trading fundamentally gets immensely reduced or banned. So Goldman Sachs responds by moving all their prop trading desks to London. Now, there are two ways to think about that. Let them go, or if that prop trading desk in London gets them in trouble, the U.S. taxpayer, since Goldman Sachs is still a U.S. corporation, AIG's credit default swaps, well, they were in Wilton, Connecticut, but they were also in London. And that didn't cause the British government to have to put up $183 billion. Our government had to do that.
No, our government decided to do that.
That's an interesting, okay. Now you got me. Now you really got. The next question is, what would have happened if our government decided not to do that?
Well, actually, it's a different point.
It is.
It is a different point. But I'm okay if you want to talk about that point.
But can I just interrupt for 1 second before we talk about that?
You want to know the answer to that, don't you?
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
We'll get right back to it.
Okay.
I've spent the last year and a half working on too many international commissions, one of which Rob Johnson, who's here, was very active in, that Joe Stiglitz headed up for the United Nations. And my perception is, reinforced by a column recently by Gillian Tett, is that, first of all, the rest of the world is looking to the United States. What is the United States going to do? I think the financial reg reform bill is going to be have a very big impact internationally. Number two, if you read the bill, it has very strong jurisdictional grasp for things that affect the United States but may be done elsewhere. So it's going to be hard to escape that. In the last minutes before the conference committee was going to lock this thing up, the Wall Street and the Fortune 500 companies ran around and saying, oh, everybody's going to move to London. We're going to lose the tax money that the banks have, not to mention that we lost all the unemployed people who aren't paying taxes because of what the banks did. Gillian Tett just wrote a column and said, early last week, the school year closes late in London, that All the bankers were going to their fancy schools to pick up their children and saying, I don't know if I'm going to see you in the fall semester because the tax is so heavy in the United Kingdom. The European Commission is becoming very aggressive. The European Parliament is becoming very aggressive. And unbelievably enough, the Tory government is not, unlike the Labour government, the Tory government is not backing the city. They are much more open-minded to regulation. So from where I sit, I feel, again, I come across as Pollyannish. You should see me when I get up in the morning. But I have a sense of optimism that the world is going to coalesce around standards. Nobody wants what happened in the United States to happen, and some of it did happen. You know, when the Paulson deal fell apart, Royal Bank of Scotland got held holding the bag, and the Labour government decided to, maybe they didn't have to give them $16 billion of taxpayer money to bail them out. So this problem is a worldwide problem. I think there are lessons learned, and I think the United States could lead the way on this.
I got the red light, which means we're going to open it up to questions. But before we do, Elizabeth?
Yeah, I really walked into that, didn't I?
You really did.
Okay, so let me say it this way. Triple underline, this is not necessarily the view of my panelists, my co-panelists, which none of this is, including the parts about bad dates in high school. So here's how I see this. I see this as the government had to do something. We really were in a panic. Every metaphor you want to use about standing on the edge of a cliff, crumbling from underneath us, I really do believe that. And I think the government needed to do something really powerful that effectively said, we will not simply stand by on a point of ideology about markets and let our entire economy implode. I believe that. But having said that, the notion that money goes out by the double shovelful to large financial institutions without wiping out the equity in those institutions, without firing the top management of those institutions, and without saying there is going to be some shared haircut at the debt level, has put us in a box that is going to make it really hard to climb out of this recession and climb forward in this economy. And I want to underline this. For everybody who has said the words too big to fail over the last 2 years that we've talked about this, if those had been the terms for getting government money, we would not be having that conversation because it would not look so attractive to get government money. Everybody would be managing against that and saying, I'm never going out to the edge of that cliff again.
No, you're absolutely right. The financial
say that
system
again.
had to be, you're absolutely right, because the financial system had to be saved. You could not allow it to collapse. However, we did not do it the right way. And it was a big, big mistake that is actually irreparable. We are going to pay a price for that for years because we should have injected capital into the banks, diluting the existing capital and diluting also the unsecured bondholders. Then if there's a loss on top of it, so be it. It's well worth paying it for the sake of preserving the financial system. However, we didn't nationalize the banks. We nationalized the liabilities of the banks and we left them the equity.
Yeah.
And we allowed them to earn their way out of a hole, and which they are doing at a very rapid rate. So they have bumper earnings, paying bumper bonuses as if they had earned it. And at the same time, as Elizabeth Warren